Millionaire thought she was in a coma until his pregnant wife logged into his bank account. Have you ever heard a secret so shocking it sent tremors through an entire family? This story is no ordinary tale of wealth and jealousy. It's a swirl of hidden identities, breathtaking deceit, and a pregnant wife's startling discovery in her millionaire husband's bank account. When James Harrington, a wealthy entrepreneur in London's high society, believed his mistress lay in a coma, he thought his perfect life would remain neatly under wraps. But a single login by his pregnant wife, Elizabeth, unleashed a storm of buried truths. Brace yourselves. This unfolding drama will drag you through betrayal, obsession, and desperate ambitions gone terribly awry. James Harrington was the sort of man people either idolized or envied. Tall, confident, and impeccably dressed, James came from old money but built even greater wealth on his own. He was known to sign deals that turned entire industries on their heads. In some circles, he was referred to as the Golden Touch because anything he invested in thrived. Paparazzi flashed their cameras at him when he emerged from charity galas. Business journalists devoted countless articles to his strategies. He had not just one penthouse in London's upscale Mayfair district, but also a sprawling estate in the English countryside. Yet behind this glamorous front lurk secrets few knew. The public witnessed the perfect facade, a self-made millionaire married to a poised wife, Elizabeth Harrington, who was glowing with pregnancy. To outsiders, the couple seemed an ideal match, two successful, refined individuals whose union promised a bright future. Elizabeth came from a respectable lineage as well. Her father, Sir Edmund Blackwood, was a renowned heart surgeon who had saved lives in the highest circles of power. She embodied elegance and dignity, an expectant mother with her feet planted firmly in the realm of polite society. On a chilly autumn afternoon, the Harringtons hosted a charity luncheon at their estate. The property, called Rosemore Manor, was an old-world country house enveloped by acres of manicured gardens. Guests arrived in luxury cars, stepping out in sophisticated suits and dresses. Everyone marveled at the curated rose garden, the symmetrical hedges, and the tranquil fountain in the courtyard. Among the guests was Michael Bingham, James's longtime friend, who had also served as best man at their wedding. There was Lady Catherine Stewart, a well-known patron of the arts, sporting an elegant brooch rumoured to be worth a small fortune. Finally, there was Alexandra Lexi Delacroix, a rising fashion designer who had James as her silent financial backer. Elizabeth entertained guests, her smile radiant, exuding warmth that made everyone feel welcome. It was a picture of marital and social bliss. Yet, through the polite conversation, the popping champagne corks, and the hushed talk of philanthropic pursuits, a nervous flicker in James's eyes surfaced each time his phone buzzed in his pocket. He would discreetly check the message, then stuff the phone back in his jacket with a stiff expression. Something beyond the scope of perfect hospitality gnawed at him. As the event continued, Elizabeth's eyes narrowed slightly each time James grew tense at a text. She was no fool. She sensed an unease in her husband. But it was easy enough to mistake it for stress about business deals or something to do with the brand new software venture James was launching. Little did she know, those messages had nothing to do with software or philanthropic commitments. Instead, they were updates concerning a young woman named Cassandra Delgado, a woman whose existence was carefully shielded from Elizabeth. A woman James believed to be in a coma at a private hospital across town. Cassandra Delgado was a name known only to a select few in James's circle, his personal assistant, Victoria Mills, and a private doctor, Dr. Alan Friedman, employed to watch over Cassandra's health. James had met Cassandra 6 months earlier at a finance conference in Paris, ironically the same weekend Elizabeth discovered she was pregnant. Cassandra was not just another fling. She was a brilliant equity analyst who had enthralled him with her wit and sharp insight about European markets. Their conversations had sparked a potent attraction James couldn't resist. Their affair played out in secret rendezvous, discreet hotel suites in foreign cities, late-night dinners at restaurants known for their absolute confidentiality, and impassioned weekends in James's private chalet in the Alps. For a while, it was simply a thrilling romance. Cassandra wasn't content to be just a mistress. She was ambitious. She challenged James's decisions in business, questioned his philanthropic methods, and occasionally even criticized how he balanced personal responsibilities. There was a level of engagement and unpredictability that mesmerized him, but then the fateful accident occurred. Cassandra was returning from an investment conference in Geneva when her car skidded on a patch of black ice and slammed into a guardrail. The crash left her with severe head trauma. She was rushed to a private clinic in London, where James footed the astronomical medical bills. The doctors placed her in an induced coma to help her recover from swelling in her brain. Initially, James feared that if his wife discovered Cassandra or her expensive care, everything he had worked for his marriage, his carefully curated public image, would come crashing down. And so James orchestrated a cover-up that was as elaborate as it was callous. He paid Dr. Friedman and the clinic's administration handsomely to keep Cassandra's presence off any public records. Using shell companies, he transferred funds to the clinic each month, ensuring top-notch care. To the outside world, Cassandra Delgado had practically vanished. Cassandra's friends assumed she had gone off the grid, perhaps traveling or shifting jobs. James had confiscated her phone and personal belongings, feeding bits of misinformation wherever necessary. In his mind, James told himself that paying for her care was the right thing to do. He rationalized that he was protecting both Cassandra and Elizabeth, safeguarding them from scandal. Guilt for the accident gnawed at him, though logically he knew he had not caused her to drive on that cursed patch of ice. Still, had it not been for his encouragement, she might never have rushed to catch that late-night flight from Geneva. More than guilt, though, James was driven by fear of exposure. When he received daily updates that Cassandra lay comatose, stable yet unresponsive, he felt a twisted sense of relief. He convinced himself that, for the moment, the problem was contained, allowing him to keep living his life as the perfect husband and soon-to-be father. He never dared visit Cassandra in person for fear someone, maybe a nurse or a random onlooker, would recognize him. No, he planned to wait until after Elizabeth gave birth, after the dust settled, to figure out how to handle Cassandra's eventual recovery. He'd pay for her rehabilitation, give her a handsome settlement if necessary. Then she would disappear from his life. That was James's plan until it all unraveled. 2 weeks after the charity luncheon, Elizabeth was about 6 months pregnant. Her morning sickness had subsided, leaving her more energetic. She filled her days with prenatal yoga classes and working with interior designers to perfect the nursery at Rosemore Manor. Pale yellow walls, hand-painted murals of whimsical animals, plush carpets shipped from Turkey, nothing but the best for the awaited heir or heiress to the Harrington fortune. As for James, he was flying under the radar, busily ensuring the final touches on his new tech project, a software suite that promised to revolutionize data analytics in the finance world. He spent days locked in high-level meetings and nights locked in his office, answering calls from Dr. Friedman about Cassandra's condition. Then, one evening at Rosemore Manor, the landline rang. Elizabeth, sipping herbal tea, answered. The person on the other line was Dr. Friedman, using the private number he wasn't meant to dial without explicit instruction. Panicking, Friedman said, "Hello, this is an urgent message for Mr. Harrington. May I speak to him?" "It's about the patient, Cassandra Delgado." Elizabeth froze, confusion swirling in her mind. Why was a doctor calling the house line about someone named Cassandra Delgado? She gathered herself quickly. I'm sorry, Dr. Friedman, did you say? My husband is busy. Can you tell me what this is about? Flustered, Friedman stammered something about a misdial, then hung up abruptly. Elizabeth set the receiver down slowly, her heart pounding. Cassandra Delgado. The name meant nothing to her. Yet the mention of patient roused a storm of questions. She marched into James's study, where he was poring over financial reports. You had a call, she said, voice tight with concern. Dr. Friedman. He mentioned something about a patient named Cassandra Delgado. James's face went ashen. In that split second, Elizabeth saw the flicker of guilt, fear, and something she recognized as panic. He tried to cover it with a laugh. Cassandra Delgado? I've never heard of her. Probably a telemarketer or scam call. Let me see if I can find out. He gently maneuvered Elizabeth out of his study and closed the door. She stood outside, heart pounding. Something was off. Telemarketers didn't usually identify themselves as doctors discussing a patient. And James's behavior was telling. She wasn't sure what she suspected, but she felt an uneasy stirring in the pit of her stomach. Perhaps the stress of pregnancy heightened her intuition. She resolved to watch James more carefully. The next day, James departed early for a business trip to Berlin, at least. That's what he told Elizabeth. In reality, he was meeting with Dr. Friedman at a hidden clinic in London. Tucked away on a quiet street in Kensington, this clinic catered to high-profile clients who wanted absolute privacy. James slipped through a side entrance, wearing a cap and dark sunglasses. In a dimly lit office, Dr. Friedman looked uneasy. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrington. I had an emergency last night. Cassandra had a sudden fever. I was trying to reach you on your private cell. When it went to voicemail, I thought I'd try the home number. I didn't realize your wife would pick up. James glowered. We can't have any more mistakes, Friedman. If my wife finds out about Cassandra, everything I've built could implode. But more importantly, how is Cassandra's condition? Friedman exhaled nervously. She's improving. She's been stirring more, responding to stimuli. There's a possibility she could come out of the coma sooner than we anticipated. That news, which should have been cause for celebration, filled James with dread. That's good, he forced himself to say. Keep me updated. Make sure no one visits her. I'll handle the finances, but I can't be seen here often. Dr. Friedman nodded. Of course, Mr. Harrington. I'll keep everything confidential. Returning to his car, James was overcome by a swirl of worry. If Cassandra regained consciousness, what story would she tell? Would she accuse him of abandoning her? Of a cover-up? She could demand money. Or maybe she'd keep quiet if he paid her enough. He tried to quell his anxiety by reminding himself that he was still in control. After all, he had connections, he had wealth. He would find a way out of this. Back at Rosemore Manor, Elizabeth's day took a fateful turn. She decided to finalize the nursery budget, a seemingly mundane task. Typically, her husband's personal assistant handled financial transactions, but Elizabeth wanted to oversee the details personally. She tried to log into their joint online bank account, but found the password had been changed. Confused, she tried James's usual set of passcodes, birthdays, anniversary dates, random numbers, but nothing worked. Elizabeth frowned. It was peculiar. They had always had open access to each other's accounts. They were a family. Why would James abruptly change their shared password? Her mind flashed back to the phone call from Dr. Friedman. Could the two be connected? She called James only to get his voicemail. This was uncharacteristic, given how quickly he usually responded to her calls. She left a message. James, it's Elizabeth. I tried to get into our bank account, but it's not letting me. Did you change the password? Please call me. Several hours passed. No return call. Her nerves frayed. Elizabeth rang Michael Bingham, James's old friend and business confidant. Michael seemed taken aback by her worry. James told me he was dealing with some sensitive business transactions, Michael said. Maybe that's why he changed the password. Try not to stress, it can't be anything major. But Elizabeth couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was afoot. The next day, she decided to tackle the problem more directly. She drove to Harrington Capital's headquarters, a sleek skyscraper in central London. Inside the labyrinth of glass, walled offices, employees bustled about with hushed urgency. Elizabeth was well known, so the receptionist allowed her to go straight up to James's office on the executive floor. James wasn't there, nor was his assistant. The door was locked. Through the frosted glass, Elizabeth spotted a laptop on the desk. Anxiety gnawed at her. She felt uneasy snooping around, but a stronger need to know the truth compelled her. She reached for the spare key hidden behind a potted plant. She knew of its existence from casual mentions over the years. She entered the office, closed the door behind her, and approached the desk. The laptop was locked, demanding a password. Determined, she tried a variation of significant dates, typed systematically, word by word. Finally, something clicked. The password was the day they found out she was pregnant. The screen unlocked. Elizabeth's heart hammered. She noticed a folder labeled Private Delgado. Confusion roiled. Was Delgado the same name she had heard on the phone? Without hesitating, she clicked it open. A flurry of documents appeared, medical bills, statements from a private clinic, transactions to a doctor, Friedman, and other references to Cassandra Delgado. Terrified and fascinated, Elizabeth skimmed through. Her eyes widened at repeated monthly payments, extraordinarily large sums for a private ward, intensive neurological care, advanced treatment. She covered her mouth as her mind pieced together a horrifying puzzle. Cassandra Delgado was in a private clinic. James was footing the bill. The first payments started about 6 months ago, the same period that coincided with Elizabeth's pregnancy announcement. The medical documents contained phrases like accident, trauma, severe head injury, induced coma. Elizabeth sank into James's desk chair, trembling. Why would her husband pay for a stranger's long-term hospital care? Why was everything so secretive? She stared at the bank transactions, noticing that they originated from a separate account in James's name, one she had never heard of before, an account that had shockingly high balances. The next evening, James returned home from his business trip, expecting a serene mansion and a warm welcome from his pregnant wife. Instead, he found Elizabeth in the lounge, perched on the edge of a sofa, her hands clasped over her belly as though shielding the baby from some intangible threat. A thick file of printouts rested beside her. "We need to talk," she said, her eyes blazing with anger and betrayal. "Who is Cassandra Delgado? Why are you sending thousands of pounds a month to pay for her care in a private clinic?" James's composure wavered. He had practiced 100 possible cover stories during his drive back, but Elizabeth's furious gaze shredded his mental scripts. He tried to deflect, to spin a narrative about charity or philanthropic responsibility. But Elizabeth cut him off with a tremor in her voice. "Don't lie to me." Realizing he could no longer feign innocence, James offered a curated version of the truth. He told her that Cassandra was a talented consultant he had been working with, that she got into a serious accident. He felt responsible because she was returning from a work trip on his behalf. So, out of guilt and duty, he covered her medical bills. Elizabeth listened, tears brimming. "And you had to hide it from me? Create a secret account? Password protect everything? Pay off a doctor to keep it all quiet? That doesn't sound like a normal sense of responsibility. That sounds like an affair, James." He hesitated. The truth was that while Elizabeth was perceptive, she didn't know every detail yet. A wave of self-preservation overcame him. He tried to placate her with half-truths. "We got close while working together, but it was a lapse in judgment. I'm sorry. I never meant for you to find out. I was going to handle it myself. Elizabeth's tears spilled. You betrayed me while I've been pregnant with our child. I've stood by you, loved you, given you my trust. She clutched her abdomen as though feeling the baby's presence more acutely. I can't believe you'd do this. You've left me humiliated, James. In that moment, James realized how fragile his fortress was. For all his wealth and cunning, he had failed to keep his double life hidden. The love and respect that once bound them seemed to fracture before his eyes. He reached out to Elizabeth, but she shrank away, tears cutting sharp lines down her cheeks. This marriage, she said, voice trembling, is standing on very thin ice. If I discover anything else you're hiding, any more lies, I will walk away from you for good, and you will not see this child. With that, she retired to her bedroom, leaving James alone, the flickering fireplace reflecting the turmoil in his mind. He felt the pang of losing control, fear of losing the woman he still cared for, perhaps more than he realized. Yet, in the swirling chaos, he also felt the haunting presence of Cassandra, the mistress who might awaken any day. If Elizabeth discovered the depth of his involvement with her, the entire house of cards would topple. 2 days later, Elizabeth confided in her father, Sir Edmund Blackwood. Over tea in her father's study, tears running down her cheeks, she explained the situation in broad strokes, omitting certain details that made her feel ashamed. Sir Edmund listened gravely, his brow furrowed. I had a sense James was not the type to lead a straightforward life, Sir Edmund said, kindly but firmly. He's brilliant, driven, but also secretive. There's a reason his success soared so quickly. Elizabeth wiped her eyes. I still love him, Dad, but I need the whole truth. If I can't trust him, how can I raise a child with him? Sir Edmund placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. Then find the truth. You're strong. You have resources. Use them. Spurred by her father's encouragement, Elizabeth decided to dig deeper. She wanted to confirm James's story that Cassandra Delgado had been a consultant for his firm and was now comatose. If that was all there was to it, an affair plus guilt, could she handle it? Possibly. But if James was hiding more, she had to know. So she hired a private investigator named Daniel Pendleton, famed for discretion and thoroughness. Pendleton pulled phone records, scoured flight manifests, and discreetly interviewed staff at Harrington Capital. The puzzle that formed was more damning than Elizabeth feared. James and Cassandra had been spotted in Paris, Rome, and the Swiss Alps, all at times that overlapped suspiciously with James's business trips. They had shared hotel suites, and Cassandra was seen wearing expensive jewelry that James must have gifted her. Even more disturbing was how meticulously James had orchestrated Cassandra's disappearance from public records after her accident. Pendleton uncovered a hidden web of shell companies channeling money into the private clinic, proving that James was funneling large sums to keep Cassandra's condition out of official hospital databases. Elizabeth's heartbreak deepened. It wasn't merely an affair, it was a labyrinth of lies, spanning at least 6 months. She felt betrayed, but a quiet, steely resolve took hold of her heart. She wasn't just a wife or a victim, she was the daughter of a knighted surgeon, a soon-to-be mother, a woman who deserved respect. She planned her next move carefully. If James insisted on subterfuge, then she would meet with Cassandra Delgado herself. And if Cassandra remained in a coma, perhaps Elizabeth would glean enough from medical staff to piece together the missing fragments. Under the guise of a routine obstetrics appointment in London, Elizabeth slipped away to Kensington and found the private clinic that Dr. Friedman ran. Using a fabricated story about being referred for a consultation, she convinced a young nurse that she needed to see Dr. Friedman. The nurse led Elizabeth down a hallway lined with glossy paintings of pastoral scenes. A subtle hush lingered in the corridors. When Dr. Friedman saw Elizabeth, he seemed to blanch. "Miss S. Harrington, this is unexpected. How can I help you?" Elizabeth, trembling with a mixture of fear and determination, said, "I know my husband is paying you to treat Cassandra Delgado. I want to see her. I have the right to know what's going on." Friedman tried to maintain composure, but sweat gathered on his brow. "Miss S. Harrington, this is highly irregular. I'm bound by patient confidentiality." Elizabeth's gaze sharpened. "Is the confidentiality greater than the hush money you're receiving from my husband? Because I promise you, if you don't let me see her, I will expose every financial transaction. I will drag this clinic and your name through every court in London." Flustered, Friedman hesitated. Finally, with trembling reluctance, he led Elizabeth to a small, private room. The beep of monitoring devices and the hush of ventilators filled the air. On the bed lay a young woman with bandages wrapped around her head and the fourth line in her arm. Her eyes were closed, her expression strangely serene amidst the medical machinery. Elizabeth approached the bed, heart pounding. Cassandra Delgado was beautiful, even in her vulnerable state. High cheekbones, long lashes, and an aura of intelligence in the lines of her face. Elizabeth's anger wavered into a wave of pity. Is this the woman James had risked everything for? "Yes, that's Cassandra Delgado," Friedman murmured. "She was in a severe accident. We had her in an induced coma for months. Recently, we began reducing sedation. There are signs of improvement, but it's slow." Elizabeth's throat tightened. A swirl of conflicting emotions arose: hurt, jealousy, compassion. She gently touched Cassandra's hand. It was warm. For a fleeting moment she wondered, did Cassandra love James? Did James truly love her? Or was this all just a reckless fling? She turned back to Friedman. "Will she recover?" He nodded hesitantly. "We're hopeful. There's still swelling in her brain, but she started to show reflex responses. She could wake up in days or weeks. Hard to predict. Sometimes patients need months of rehabilitation." Elizabeth swallowed hard. The knowledge that Cassandra might soon awaken brought a new kind of dread. If this woman regained consciousness, she might reveal every sordid detail of the affair. Elizabeth braced herself for an uncertain future, but she also felt a strange sense of power. She had seen Cassandra. This was no phantom mistress. She was a flesh and blood woman who might hold the key to unraveling James's carefully curated world of secrets. That evening, Elizabeth returned to Rosemore Manor and found James pacing in the study, his tie loosened, hair disheveled. He had apparently learned from Friedman about her visit to the clinic. The moment she stepped inside, James stormed toward her. "What were you thinking going there? Barging in on Friedman? You don't understand the damage you could cause." His anger ignited hers. "Oh, I understand plenty. I understand you had an extended affair, that you orchestrated a cover-up, that you funneled money through sham accounts to keep her out of sight. I understand you lied to me while I'm carrying your child." James's face contorted with guilt and frustration. "I never meant to hurt you. I was going to end it. Cassandra's accident changed everything. I felt responsible. Responsible or cornered?" Elizabeth shot back. "You could have told me the truth. Instead, you lied and lied, expecting me to remain in the dark while you played savior to your mistress." James's anger deflated. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands. "Elizabeth, I'm sorry. I can't undo it. I panicked. I was afraid to lose you, to lose my family, my reputation." She stood before him, arms folded protectively across her chest. "Well, here we are now. I'm not sure what to do. I've considered leaving you, but we have a child on the way. Do I want our baby to grow up without a father?" Tears welled in James's eyes. "I love you. I genuinely do. The affair was a catastrophic mistake. I tried to fix it. If you need me to sign anything, to put your name on all the accounts, to do whatever it takes to prove my loyalty, I will. Just don't leave me." Elizabeth watched him, pained. For all his wealth and brilliance, he suddenly looked small and pathetic. Part of her wanted to comfort him. The other part bristled at the notion of rewarding his deception. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "But from now on, no more secrets. That includes Cassandra Delgado, especially if she wakes up." Days passed. Elizabeth tried to maintain normalcy, focusing on her pregnancy and the daily rhythms of life at Rosemore Manor. Yet tension simmered beneath the surface. She avoided James as much as civility allowed, speaking to him only about baby necessities or household matters. At night, she stayed in a separate bedroom, unable to share the same bed with a man she felt she no longer recognized. Then, one morning, Dr. Friedman called. This time he reached Elizabeth on her cell phone by design, at her request. "Miss S. Harrington," he said, his voice urgent, "Cassandra Delgado has emerged from her coma. She's awake." Elizabeth's heart lurched. She thanked Friedman and hung up, shock waves rippling through her. She found James in his study. He looked up, wary. "What's wrong?" She bit her lip. "Cassandra's awake." His face paled. "When did this happen?" "Apparently, sometime late last night. She's conscious, though probably confused and fragile." James stood, restless. "I need to handle this." "She might." Elizabeth lifted her chin. "She might what? Expose you? Tell people the truth?" He shook his head. "I can't just abandon her. She was part of my life. But if I go there and someone sees me, the press..." Elizabeth drew a calming breath. "You orchestrated this for months. You can't hide behind fear now. If you want to talk to her, then do it." "But I'm going with you." James looked startled. "What? Why?" Elizabeth's voice wavered but held firm. "Because if you think I'm going to let you have a private little meeting with the woman you cheated on me with, you're dead wrong. If this marriage stands a chance, I need transparency, complete transparency." James reluctantly agreed. Within the hour, they arrived at the private clinic. Dr. Friedman led them to Cassandra's room, cautioning them that she was weak and disoriented. There, on the bed, Cassandra lay with her eyes partially open, an expression of confusion etched on her face. When they entered, Cassandra's gaze fluttered between them. Her voice, rasped by disuse, barely rose above a whisper. "James? Where am I?" James approached her, hesitantly taking her hand. "You're in a private clinic in Kensington. You had an accident, a car crash." Her eyes searched the unfamiliar surroundings. "I remember driving. Then impact." She looked at Elizabeth, perplexed. "Who is she?" James swallowed. "This is my wife, Elizabeth." A flicker of realization or heartbreak flared in Cassandra's eyes. "Your wife," she repeated softly, her voice thick with emotion. She tried to raise her body, but tubes and a sense of weakness held her down. "What's happening? Why am I here?" "James, what have you done?" Elizabeth stepped forward. "He's been paying for your care. You've been in a coma for months. I only found out a short while ago." Cassandra's eyes brimmed with tears. "A coma? So everything is real." Her gaze turned to James with an agonized confusion. "You promised me a future. I told you I didn't want to be someone's secret. And now your wife is here. You lied to me." James winced, unable to hide his shame. "Cassandra, I'm sorry." But Cassandra cut him off, her anger giving her a surprising burst of strength. "Don't say sorry. You put me here in this locked-up facility. No one could find me or visit me. Did you think I wouldn't wake up? Or that I'd vanish?" Elizabeth's chest tightened with a pang of pity for the injured woman. But her own anger burned too. "I don't know what James promised you, Miss Delgado, but he's my husband. I didn't know you existed. You were hidden from me just like I was hidden from you." Cassandra closed her eyes, tears streaming down. "I believed him. He told me he would leave you, that I was the one he truly loved. An anguished sob broke from her. I gave up so much. I nearly died. Elizabeth stiffened at that revelation. Had James pledged to leave her? James frantically shook his head. Cassandra, I said things, but... Cassandra's fury exploded. Don't insult me. You said it again and again. You told me you were trapped in a loveless marriage, that you and Elizabeth only stayed together for the family's sake, that you wanted a divorce after the baby was born. You told me we'd be free to start a life together. Elizabeth felt as though the floor had opened beneath her. She shot James a look of raw betrayal. Is that true? He stammered. It was the heat of the moment. I wasn't thinking straight. I only said it to keep Cassandra from leaving me. Elizabeth's lips quivered in anger and sorrow. So, you promised her a future, all while I was pregnant with your child. And then, once she was out of commission, you never intended for her to be part of your life again. James pressed his hands to his temples. I didn't know what to do. Cassandra turned her face away, sobbing silently. Friedman hovered by the door, alarmed by the escalating tension. Elizabeth inhaled shakily, feeling protective of Cassandra despite her role as James's mistress. The heartbreak in the room felt suffocating. That's enough for today, Elizabeth declared, stepping toward Friedman. She needs rest. I'll ensure the bills remain paid, but from now on, I'll handle it personally. James, let's go. In that moment, Elizabeth assumed a mantle of power neither James nor Cassandra expected. She signaled that she, not James, would control the narrative. She didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but she knew that if she didn't assert her agency, now the chaos would consume her. Back home, Elizabeth stormed out of the car the moment they arrived at the estate. James followed, begging her to give him a chance to explain. Cassandra exaggerated, he argued. I never fully intended to divorce you. I was just caught up. It was an affair, not a new life plan. Elizabeth stared at him, tears burning in her eyes. I can't even look at you. I don't know which is worse, that you betrayed me, or that you used such blatant, manipulative lies on her. Both, I suppose. James pleaded. Elizabeth, the first beg you, don't give up on me. I'll do anything. She exhaled a shaking breath. Then be prepared for consequences. I'm not sure if we can salvage our marriage, but if we do, I'm setting the terms. She retreated to her separate bedroom, leaving James alone with his dread. Days melted into a strange routine. James tried repeatedly to apologize, but Elizabeth refused to speak about the affair. She spent her time finalizing her last trimester medical appointments and consulting with lawyers about her potential options. Meanwhile, she arranged for Cassandra's ongoing treatment, transferring the monthly payments from James's secret account to a new account she created in both her and James's names. If nothing else, it forced James to come to her for every transaction, ensuring she had control. Cassandra's condition improved. Friedman reported that her memory was returning in patchy fragments. The moment she felt strong enough to talk to reporters or lawyers, the scandal could explode. Gossip columns hungrily eyed James Harrington's personal life, suspecting rumors but lacking proof. Elizabeth dreaded a media frenzy, but steeled herself for the possibility. If that happened, she would protect herself and her child. James would have to face the consequences of his deceit. One afternoon, a few weeks after Cassandra regained consciousness, Elizabeth received an urgent call from Friedman. Mrs. Harrington, Miss Delgado is asking to see you. She says it's important. Elizabeth hesitated, but curiosity and compassion won out. She agreed and soon found herself again by Cassandra's bedside. This time, Cassandra was sitting up, propped against pillows, face pale but alert. She looked at Elizabeth with a quiet intensity. "Thank you for coming," Cassandra began softly. I wanted to apologize. I had no idea James was lying to us both so thoroughly." Elizabeth offered a wry, sad smile. I suspect he told each of us different stories. We both believed him. Cassandra swallowed hard. He told me you were controlling cold and that you were only staying with him out of obligation. He said your marriage was over long before we met. But seeing you, hearing everything, I realize he manipulated me. I wanted to hate you for being his wife, but now I see you're also a victim. Elizabeth felt tears welling in her eyes. I wish things had never come to this, but thank you for your honesty. Cassandra's lips trembled. He risked my life. He left me in this clinic as though I were some inconvenience. I feel like he tried to erase me once I was no longer useful or fun. Elizabeth nodded, acknowledging the heartbreak. I don't have an easy answer for you, but I promise you'll receive all the medical care you need. I won't let him abandon you. Cassandra's eyes shone with gratitude. Thank you. One more thing, I spoke with the doctors. They said the accident might have been less severe if I hadn't rushed that night. James had demanded I meet him in Geneva. In a way, he's directly responsible for why I took those roads so late. Elizabeth pressed her lips together. She felt a pang of sympathy for Cassandra, but also recognized the conversation was edging into legal territory. I understand, she said quietly. Do what you must to heal and move forward. Cassandra looked down, tears dripping onto the white hospital sheets. I plan to. I'm meeting with a lawyer to discuss my options. But please know, I won't do anything to intentionally hurt you or your child. Whatever I do, it's aimed at holding James accountable for what he did to me. Elizabeth's gaze grew distant, imagining the storm that was about to break over James's head. She simply nodded. I see. Thank you for telling me. Once again at Rosemore Manor, Elizabeth confronted James that evening. Cassandra is awake, stronger, and speaking to lawyers. She may sue you. I don't know if she can, but she might try. James went pale. Sue me for what? The accident was not my fault. Elizabeth gave him a bitter look. She believes you pressured her to travel under unsafe conditions. She also claims you effectively tried to imprison her in that clinic. It's complicated, but with enough evidence, this could become a high-profile case. He shook his head frantically. This can't happen. My reputation, my deals. I could lose everything. Elizabeth's voice was cold. Perhaps you should have thought about that before starting an affair and lying to everyone. She paused, then spoke the words that had been forming for weeks. I've consulted lawyers myself. If I want to, I can file for divorce and likely get custody of our child, considering your moral misconduct and attempts at deception. James's eyes widened in horror. Elizabeth, please. What about us, our baby? She swallowed, feeling a deep pain. Despite everything, part of me still wants our child to have a father. But I refuse to stay in a marriage built on lies. So here's my condition: full honesty financially, emotionally. You will put the estate, the business shares, all your assets into transparent accounts. I want them accessible in case you ever dare lie again. We will sign a post-nuptial agreement stating that if you commit another breach of trust, I have rights to the estate, and you will pay for Cassandra's full recovery with no strings attached. James looked both humbled and frightened. That's a lot to ask. Elizabeth's laugh was harsh. You took a lot from me. You took my faith, my sense of security. If you want to be in this marriage and be a father to our baby, you'll do it. He nodded, resigned. Yes, I'll do it. Just don't leave me. As Elizabeth turned to go, tears brimmed again. She realized her pregnancy hormones were making her even more emotional, but this was real heartbreak. She didn't know if she could ever truly forgive him, but for her child's sake, she was willing to try. In the weeks that followed, James complied with Elizabeth's demands. He met with lawyers, hammered out a post-nuptial agreement, and transferred partial ownership of his properties and accounts to Elizabeth. Business partners grumbled. Rumors swirled about the reason behind these abrupt changes. James put out statements claiming he was reorganizing his wealth for estate planning reasons. Meanwhile, Cassandra filed a personal injury lawsuit against James, accusing him of negligence and emotional distress. The tabloids caught wind of it, and soon James's carefully manicured public image began to crumble. Photos surfaced of James with Cassandra in Rome, fueling speculation. The press had a field day, painting him as a philandering millionaire who had driven his mistress into harm's way. Investors raised eyebrows. Stocks for Harrington Capital wavered. Elizabeth found herself in the crosshairs of gossip columns. They labeled her the long-suffering wife, humiliating her further. She shielded herself at Rosemore Manor, focusing on her final weeks of pregnancy. She avoided social media, ignoring the swirling rumors. Her only solace was that the baby was healthy, the doctor said. She often rested in the nursery, rocking in the chair, imagining a simpler future where the child could grow up in a stable household. James, for his part, seemed broken. He spent hours meeting with crisis PR teams, lawyers, and advisors, trying to salvage his reputation. At night, he returned home exhausted, exchanging only a few words with Elizabeth. The mansion felt like a silent battleground, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Despite the legal battles, Elizabeth made sure Cassandra's medical expenses were covered. Now in a rehabilitation center, Cassandra was learning to walk steadily again, regaining her life step by step. Elizabeth called occasionally to check on her progress. They were not friends, nor would they ever be, but there was a sense of mutual respect born from shared betrayal. Each was seeking to reclaim her life after James's duplicity. As winter approached, Elizabeth went into labor. A ferocious storm raged outside, rain lashing the windows of Rosemore Manor. James, frazzled and anxious, rushed Elizabeth to the hospital. Gone were the illusions of perfection. They arrived in the middle of the night, Elizabeth's contractions coming fast and furious. In the maternity ward, hours felt like days. Elizabeth grasped James's hand, tears of pain and fear mingling with residual anger. But in that crucible of raw emotion, amid the sting of contractions and the swirling hospital lights, something fragile but earnest emerged. A flicker of understanding that they were on the brink of a life-altering moment, a new life that transcended the tangled web of lies. Finally, at dawn, their baby was born, a beautiful girl with a strong, healthy cry. Exhausted, Elizabeth gazed upon their daughter, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks. James was speechless, overcome by a wave of relief and awe. For a moment, the trials of the past months melted away. The baby was perfect. A new start, an innocent life untainted by scandal or heartbreak. Holding the baby in her arms, Elizabeth felt a sense of purpose that transcended everything else. She wasn't sure if her marriage would survive, but she knew her love for this tiny person would guide her choices going forward. James kneeled beside the hospital bed, tears on his cheeks, whispering apologies and promises. Elizabeth closed her eyes, listening but not yet ready to respond. The baby's small hand curled around her finger. In that moment, Elizabeth decided that above all else, she would protect her child's future, even if it meant leaving James eventually. But she would give him a chance to prove he could be the father their daughter deserved. Weeks later, Elizabeth left the hospital with her newborn, who they named Clara Rose Harrington, a nod to the estate's beloved rose gardens. They returned to Rosemore Manor, where a new nursery awaited. Elizabeth took joy in small moments. Clara's gentle coos, the late-night feedings, the sense of wonder that accompanied new motherhood. James tried his best to atone. He was present for every feeding, changed diapers, sang lullabies off-key, but with genuine devotion. The lawsuit with Cassandra was settled quietly out of court for a substantial sum. She used the money to build a new life far away from James's orbit, but occasionally sent Elizabeth updates on her continued recovery, never to gloat, but as a courtesy. Elizabeth appreciated the gesture, though it came tinged with sorrow. As time passed, the scandal receded from tabloid headlines. Another celebrity controversy overshadowed James's story, allowing him to gradually restore his reputation. The reorganization of his wealth, insisted upon by Elizabeth, remained in place. The memory of betrayal lingered, but in the hush of late-night feedings, Elizabeth saw glimpses of a changed man in James. Whether it was remorse, fatherly love, or both, he seemed determined to be a better person for Clara, if not for himself. Did Elizabeth fully forgive him? Such wounds are slow to heal, if they ever do completely, but for now, a fragile peace settled over Rosemore Manor. On sunny mornings, they would walk together through the rose garden, Elizabeth cradling Clara, James pushing the stroller, trying to find a sense of normalcy after a storm of lies. If love remained, it was scarred but perhaps more honest than before. Sometimes, late at night, Elizabeth would lie awake, listening to Clara's soft breathing, recalling every twist and betrayal. She knew the future held no guarantees, but she resolved to raise her daughter to value truth, resilience, and self-respect. Whatever happened with James, Elizabeth vowed that Clara would never be deceived or neglected. She carried the lessons of this tumultuous chapter like armor, determined never to be blindsided again. And so, the tale of the millionaire who thought his mistress was safely in a coma, only for his pregnant wife to discover the hidden truth, ends in a tenuous equilibrium. Lives were shattered, then slowly pieced back together. Sins were exposed, consequences paid. In the end, the only constant was the unstoppable march of life itself, embodied by a little girl named Clara Rose, who symbolized both a painful past and a hopeful tomorrow. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster of deceit, betrayal, and ultimately hard-earned redemption. In the heart of Rosemore Manor, amid hidden bank accounts and a fateful coma, we discovered that even the wealthiest, most glamorous lives can be torn apart by secrets. James Harrington's lies caught up with him in dramatic fashion, nearly destroying his marriage and costing Cassandra Delgado her life. Yet in the silent refuge of a newborn's embrace, the seeds of healing have begun to sprout. We hope this drama serves as a reminder that the truth may hurt, but deception can be far more destructive. If you found yourself captivated by this journey, please give this video a like, share it with friends who love a good real-life drama, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories. Your support helps us bring you the content you crave. Thank you for watching.
A quiet suburb, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a secret that threatened to split one family forever. It all began on a stormy night when Mark Anderson, seemingly the perfect husband, let his alluring mistress step into his pregnant wife's bedroom and into her bed. By the time dawn broke, flashing police lights flooded the driveway, and neighbors peered through windows in disbelief. No one could imagine how a once ordinary couple fell into such chaos. But within these walls lay hidden confessions, desperate betrayals, and heart-wrenching choices that would test loyalty, break trust, and leave everyone asking, how could it ever have come to this? Mark Anderson stared at the white picket fence in front of his modest suburban home on the outskirts of Denver, Colorado. The day was sunny, and a light breeze ruffled the neatly manicured lawn. He always took pride in appearances. He liked knowing everything was in its rightful place, reflecting an outward image of success and respectability. His wife Sarah often teased him about his perfectionist streak. In fact, it was one of the things she had found so endearing when they first met back in college. Their romance felt like a fairy tale in the beginning. Long strolls by the campus lake, late-night conversations about hopes and dreams, and shared laughter that echoed through dorm hallways. Mark was diligent, always rechecking his notes and color-coding everything in his backpack, while Sarah was more laid back, bringing a sense of warmth and spontaneity to his otherwise structured world. They graduated together, he with a degree in business administration, she in elementary education. Soon after, they were married on a crisp autumn afternoon, surrounded by family and a few close friends. It seemed they were destined for a happy life, ticking off all the boxes: stable jobs, a well-furnished home, and plans for children. Yet beneath the surface of this idyllic snapshot, a subtle tension had begun to settle in. As the years progressed, Mark found himself increasingly restless, obsessing over career goals, finances, and the desire for more excitement. Sarah noticed changes in him. Little things like how he lingered on his phone too often, or occasionally arrived home late with half-hearted excuses. She was patient, chalking it up to stress. After all, Mark had always been ambitious, and it made sense he might be feeling the pressure at work. When Sarah discovered she was pregnant, Mark's reaction was polite and supportive, though it lacked the unbridled enthusiasm she had expected. He hugged her, whispered reassuring words, but there was a distance in his eyes. Instead of celebrating, she found herself chasing him for each prenatal appointment, reminding him of the baby's progress. The more she tried to draw him in, the more he seemed to drift. She told herself it was a passing phase, that once the baby was born, Mark would realize the beautiful miracle they were about to share. But somewhere deep inside, Sarah felt a pang of worry, a whisper that warned her not all was right. Real trouble took root one evening when Sarah's best friend, Jessica Lee, visited for dinner. Jessica, a sharp-eyed, warm-hearted woman with a knack for reading people, discreetly pulled Sarah aside after noticing Mark's odd behavior. He was jumpy, his laughter forced, and his phone never left his sight. Jessica offered her concerns gently, but Sarah brushed them off, not wanting to believe that the man she'd built a life with might be hiding something. If anything, she blamed Mark's anxious state on the responsibilities piling up. But Mark was in fact drowning in secrets, ones that would threaten the very foundation of his marriage. He knew it, he felt it, yet he couldn't stop what was happening. That was the cruel irony of his situation. The very qualities that had once driven him to be the responsible, overachieving husband were now pushing him to take risks he never dreamed himself capable of. While Sarah napped early in the evenings or read baby manuals in her rocking chair, Mark was scrolling through messages that made his heart pound in anticipation. Messages from a woman who offered him a sense of thrill he hadn't felt in years. Her name was Carla Rodriguez, and she worked in the same office building as Mark, though in a different department. She was witty, confident, and possessed a magnetism that seemed to draw people in effortlessly. Everyone at the office talked about Carla's style, her flamboyant choice of bright pencil skirts, and the way she commanded attention during team presentations. Mark had seen her in passing, but only after being assigned to a joint project had they begun to speak. He'd noticed how she laughed at his jokes, how her eyes locked onto his when they conversed. Slowly their friendly exchanges morphed into stolen glances, then to flirtatious banter over coffee. Carla knew Mark was married. He never hid that. She even knew Sarah was pregnant. But from the moment Carla placed her hand on Mark's arm one evening during overtime, gently brushing against him, he found himself responding. He was at a precipice caught between guilt and a longing to escape from the monotony he blamed on domestic life. Carla, too, was escaping from something: her own lonely nights and a string of failed relationships. They provided each other solace a forbidden escape from their real lives. Their meetings were carefully orchestrated. Mark would fake a late work session or say he was meeting a client. Carla pretended she was staying behind to finish a report. They found dark corners in parking lots, eventually renting cheap motel rooms on the outskirts of town. Each time, Mark was sure guilt would consume him, but it never quite did lust, and adrenaline overshadowed everything. But the affair came at a cost. Mark's finances, once neatly balanced, began to suffer under secretive dinners and gifts for Carla. He found himself withdrawing from Sarah's bank account without telling her, always with the silent reassurance that he'd make it up later. He also neglected small household tasks. Sarah, now 6 months pregnant, found herself climbing step stools to change light bulbs and dragging groceries into the house alone. The tension between husband and wife continued to escalate. Sarah was frustrated and exhausted, but she tried to remain understanding. She never fully admitted to herself that Mark's distance might signify an affair. After all, he'd been loyal and devoted all the years she had known him. It was impossible, unthinkable, to consider he would betray her in such a way, especially now that they were expecting a child. Instead, she believed he was going through a personal crisis, perhaps a fear of fatherhood. Sarah confided in Jessica about her suspicions and her desire to keep the marriage intact, no matter the challenges. Then Mark made a fateful choice one Friday night. While Sarah was away at her mother's house, he invited Carla to dinner at his own home. It was a step too far, and he knew it. But Carla had teased him, saying she wanted to see how he lived. That single curiosity overshadowed every warning bell in Mark's head. He assured himself it was just dinner, just a quick look at the house, and then she'd leave. But the moment Carla stepped through the door, wearing a midnight blue dress that clung to her figure, Mark knew they had crossed a line that could never be erased. Carla marveled at the photos on the mantel, wedding pictures, snapshots of Mark and Sarah at scenic spots around Colorado. Even the ultrasound image pinned on the refrigerator. Despite it all, Carla maintained an air of detachment, as though all these tokens of Mark's married life were mere props. Yet there was a glimmer in her eyes, something like envy. Perhaps a realization that Sarah's existence was painfully real and not just some story Mark told. But she said nothing, and Mark pretended not to notice the flicker of discomfort in his mistress's gaze. After dinner, Mark opened a bottle of wine. Carla drank, swirling the red liquid in her glass, leaning against the kitchen counter, with a playful grin. The tension in the air was palpable. Even Mark, consumed by his infatuation, felt the weight of what he was doing in that moment. If Sarah came home early, if a neighbor saw something, or if Jessica decided to drop by unannounced, everything would come crashing down. But Mark brushed aside the fear and let the night's temptations drown out any lingering decency he once had. By the time Carla left, it was nearly midnight, and Mark was too intoxicated to notice he'd left behind incriminating details. A wine-stained glass on the table, a faint whiff of Carla's perfume on the couch. He cleaned up most of it the next morning, but not everything could be erased. Sarah returned the next day to find Mark unusually jittery. He barely met her eyes when she mentioned her overnight trip, merely offering a distracted smile and a quick peck on her forehead before returning to his laptop. Not one to pry, Sarah decided to let him be. Over the next week, though, she noticed more oddities. A grocery receipt with items she hadn't purchased, a new brand of perfume lingering in the bathroom. Small tears in the living room curtains, as if someone had tugged them aside in haste. Her instincts told her something was off, but each time she tried to confront Mark, He feigned ignorance or brushed off her concerns as pregnancy hormones. Sarah, unwilling to ignite a confrontation, let it slide, though her intuition screamed that she needed to dig deeper. She wondered if she was being paranoid. Jessica urged her to keep her eyes open, but also encouraged her not to jump to conclusions. Sarah's mother, Linda, who was unaware of her son-in-law's changed behavior, simply advised Sarah to rest and not overthink. But the facade was growing thinner by the day. Mark's phone buzzed incessantly with messages he refused to open in Sarah's presence. He hid credit card bills and spent evenings out under vague explanations. Each lie stacked upon the next, forging a precarious tower that threatened to collapse with the slightest shift. By the 7th month of pregnancy, Sarah's frustration peaked. She confronted Mark one evening. When she asked him point blank if there was someone else, he scoffed, calling the very suggestion absurd. He even grew indignant, accusing Sarah of not trusting him after all these years. She apologized, tears stinging her eyes, and retreated to the bedroom with a knot of dread in her stomach. It was only after she heard him slamming cupboards in the kitchen that she realized how truly disconnected they had become. Meanwhile, Carla continued her pursuit of Mark, growing bolder. She sent messages at all hours, demanded more time together, and even hinted at wanting Mark to leave Sarah. Mark, torn between his unborn child and the lust he felt for Carla, found himself buried in stress. Some part of him, however dormant, still cared for Sarah. But he couldn't break off his entanglement with Carla either. He told himself he was trapped in a scenario with no easy escape. Each day felt like stepping on thin ice, hoping it wouldn't crack. That was how things stood when Sarah planned another trip to her mother's place. Linda was having minor surgery, and Sarah wanted to help for a couple of days. Mark recognized an opportunity. He promised Sarah he would manage the house and take care of everything. In reality, he was already anticipating Carla's company. He envisioned an evening free from prying neighbors or suspicious looks. This time it felt thrillingly dangerous. He made a mental note to hide all traces properly. But Mark failed to understand the nature of secrets. They breed bigger lies, deeper guilt, and an inevitable unraveling. And that unraveling was about to accelerate much faster than even Carla anticipated. Carla arrived on a rainy evening. Mark welcomed her with a hesitant smile, but she brushed his concern aside and draped her trench coat over the chair. They shared a meal that Mark had ordered and then settled in the living room. If there was any sense of guilt, Mark buried it beneath the facade of a charming host. Carla, for her part, seemed at ease. She wandered the house, studying family photos, with a critical eye lingering especially on the ultrasound image Sarah had pinned to a corkboard in the hallway. During dinner, Carla revealed a side Mark had rarely seen, a near-obsessive curiosity about his wife's life. She asked about Sarah's routines, her profession, her due date. Mark tried to respond, vaguely uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Carla's eyes sparkled with a strange intensity when she heard that Sarah was in her 3rd trimester, as if calculating how to use this information for her own advantage. After dinner, Mark put away the plates and let Carla roam. She ended up in the master bedroom, admiring the pale blue walls and white curtains that Sarah had painstakingly chosen. The bed was neatly made, and a plush teddy bear, a gift from Sarah's friend Jessica, sat by the pillows. Carla ran her fingers along the comforter, a self-satisfied smirk tugging at her lips. "You're really living a double life, aren't you?" She teased, her tone somewhere between humor and contempt. A loving husband by day, a wild lover by night. Mark winced but mustered a forced grin. He closed the bedroom door behind him as though trying to keep prying eyes away from the intimacy of this space. Standing next to Carla, he felt a wave of conflicting emotions: excitement, revulsion, guilt, and a strange relief that she was here at all. The evening unfolded slowly, each passing hour, an accumulation of unspoken tensions. Carla had carried an overnight bag with her, just in case, she'd said. Mark convinced himself she would leave before midnight, but as the clock approached 1 a.m., they were still tangled in conversation and half-empty wine glasses. The rainstorm outside battered the windows, making the prospect of driving home unappealing. Carla feigned helplessness. "I can't drive in this. Let me stay over." And with that, a line was crossed. Mark hesitated. Should he set her up in the guest room? Was that too blatant a sign of guilt? But Carla's cunning charm won. She tiptoed into the master bedroom, letting the overhead light cast shadows across her silhouette. Mark, helpless to resist, followed. Outside, the storm raged on, oblivious to the tempest brewing within these walls. Thus Carla ended up sleeping in Sarah's bed. The place where a pregnant wife should have found comfort and rest was now occupied by the woman who had seduced her husband. Mark tossed and turned throughout the night, haunted by the gravity of his betrayal. In fleeting moments of lucidity, he almost leaped out of bed to make Carla leave. But each time he tried, Carla would pull him back with a whisper or a touch, and the swirling mixture of fear and desire imprisoned him. A part of Mark believed he might still keep everything hidden, that come sunrise Carla would slip away, and he'd erase all traces. Sarah wouldn't be back for another day. He had time to wash the sheets, tidy up the wine glasses, and stash away Carla's belongings. But fate had other plans. Plans that neither Mark nor Carla could have predicted. The next morning, a watery sun struggled to pierce the storm clouds. Mark stirred early groggy and disoriented. Carla was curled up on Sarah's side of the bed, her hair splayed across the pillow. He stared at the ceiling, heart pounding at the thought of all that needed to be done: cleaning, changing sheets, ensuring no neighbor had spotted Carla's car. He tiptoed around the house, picking up her jacket from the living room sofa, gathering wine glasses and disposing of them in the outside trash bin. As he wrestled the trash can to the curb, Mark froze. At the far end of the block, a police cruiser crept around, the bend lights flashing, but sirens off. An immediate jolt of panic shot through his veins. Had something happened to Sarah? Did they come bearing tragic news? He looked around, scanning for any sign of an accident or trouble in the neighborhood. But the cruiser slowly rolled to a stop right in front of his driveway. Two uniformed officers stepped out, Officer Paige Morales and Officer Adam Thompson, both with stern expressions. Mark swallowed hard as they approached. This couldn't possibly be about Carla, right? They wouldn't have any reason to suspect infidelity. Unless Carla had a past Mark knew nothing about. The possibility flickered in his mind, sowing anxiety. He wiped his hands on his jeans, trying to maintain composure. "Good morning," Officer Morales said, tipping her head in greeting. "We received a report about a disturbance in this area early this morning. We're checking to ensure everything's okay." "A disturbance?" Mark repeated, his voice cracking. "Yes. A neighbor reported unusual noises, shouting. Maybe an argument late last night. They also saw a car parked out front that they didn't recognize." Mark's mind raced. His next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, was known for her vigilance, especially at odd hours. Perhaps she had seen Carla arrive or heard them talking. He forced a polite smile. "I'm sorry to trouble you, officer." My wife is out of town, and I was just... Well, I might have had the television too loud last night. No arguments, though. Nothing else going on. Officer Thompson scrutinized Mark's expression. Is there anyone else in the house with you right now? Mr. Anderson? Mark felt a twist in his gut. A friend stayed over. She was caught in the storm, and... Before he could finish, Carla emerged in the doorway, barefoot, wearing one of Sarah's robes. The color drained from Mark's face as the officers turned their attention to her. Carla's eyes flicked between them, trying to feign calm, but clearly unsettled by the unexpected arrival of law enforcement. "Good morning," she said, attempting a polite nod. Officer Morales studied Carla's attire, then exchanged a glance with her partner. "And you are?" Carla's response was quick, lacking the usual confidence. Carla Rodriguez. I'm a colleague of Mark's. He was kind enough to let me crash here because of the storm." An awkward silence followed. The officers seemed unconvinced. Mark's posture stiffened, sweat beading on his forehead. Then Officer Thompson asked if they could step inside to talk further. Mark hesitated, fearing the officers might discover remnants of the affair, but refusing entry might look suspicious. Reluctantly, he led them into the living room, where Carla perched on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap. The questions continued basic inquiries about the alleged disturbance, how Carla ended up here, whether Mark's wife was aware. Each query felt like a jab at Mark's fragile house of lies. He concocted half-truths, carefully sidestepping the real nature of Carla's presence. Meanwhile, Carla remained mostly silent, occasionally offering affirmations to Mark's statements. It seemed the officers weren't entirely convinced, but they had no concrete evidence of any crime. They reminded Mark and Carla to respect neighborhood noise ordinances and to be mindful of suspicious activity. Officer Morales handed Mark her card, suggesting he call if anything came up, her eyes lingering on him, as though warning she wasn't fully buying their story. Just when Mark thought they would leave, Carla's phone rang, blasting a shrill ring through the tense atmosphere. She scrambled to silence it, but Officer Thompson motioned for her to answer. Glancing at the caller ID, Carla paled. She stepped into the next room. Voice low. After the call, Carla re-emerged, looking shaken. Officer Thompson pressed, "Everything all right?" "Ms. Rodriguez." Carla forced a smile. "Just a family matter," she said, but her hands trembled as she tucked her phone away. Sensing the tension, Officer Morales decided to wrap up. She cast one final evaluating look over the scene, then pivoted toward the front door. The moment the officers left, Mark turned to Carla, ready to ask what was happening. But before he could open his mouth, Carla's phone chimed again. Another call. Carla stared at the screen and rejected it, exhaling shakily. "What's going on?" Mark demanded, heart still pounding from the near exposure of their affair. Carla brushed past him, grabbing her jacket and slipping into her shoes. "I have to go. I'm sorry, Mark. I'll explain later." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Mark alone in a house that now felt haunted by the shadows of betrayal and suspicion. Sarah would be home soon, and he had an endless list of cover-ups to manage. But a deeper dread gnawed at him. Carla was clearly entangled in something bigger than he'd ever imagined, and it was only a matter of time before it all caught up to them, before the next knock on the door wouldn't be as benign as a noise complaint. With Carla gone, Mark raced to erase every trace of her presence. He stripped the bed, replacing the sheets with fresh linen. He collected the empty wine bottle and glasses, tossed them in the recycling bin, and opened all the windows to air out the lingering perfume. He vacuumed the living room, wiped down counters, and even mopped the kitchen floor, desperately trying to rid the house of any memory of her. As he worked, his mind replayed the scene with the police officers. He couldn't shake the feeling that Officer Morales and Officer Thompson didn't entirely believe him. Their questions had probed deeper than a simple noise complaint. Yet what choice did Mark have but to lie? Telling the truth would mean forfeiting everything: his marriage, his home, his soon-to-be fatherhood. An hour later, Sarah called to let him know her mother was stable after the minor surgery, and that she'd be returning home by evening. Mark pretended everything was normal, forcing a light-hearted tone as he asked if she needed anything from the store. After he hung up, he crumpled onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The pit of guilt in his stomach felt bottomless. Was it worth it, this double life, for a fleeting affair that offered excitement but left him feeling hollow? By mid-afternoon, Mark couldn't ignore his anxiety about Carla. He texted her multiple times. Mark, 1:03 p.m. Are you okay? Mark, 1:10 p.m. Please let me know what's going on. Mark, 2:05 p.m. Carla. I'm worried. The police thing really shook me up. No response. The phone remained silent, each passing minute, feeding Mark's paranoia. He started recalling random details from their time together. Things she'd hinted at, questionable friends, financial troubles. A mention of an ex-boyfriend who was dangerous. He'd never pressed her for details, preferring their relationship remain an escape without real-world burdens. Now he regretted his willful ignorance. By 5 p.m., Mark heard the garage door open. Sarah was home. He hurriedly got up, plastering on a smile, as though he'd spent the day doing mundane chores. She walked in slowly, her baby bump prominent under a loose-fitting dress. She looked exhausted, but relieved to be home. Without a word, she set her bag down and let Mark wrap her in a hug. "How's Mum?" he asked softly. "She's fine," Sarah said. "The surgery went well and she's recovering. I just need some rest." Together they made a simple dinner, Mark fussing over Sarah, trying to be attentive to her needs. She seemed grateful, but also distant, as though sensing something was amiss. As they ate, Sarah looked at him with eyes that flickered between love and suspicion. "Mark, was everything okay here the last couple of days?" "You seem tense," she ventured. He took a sip of water to stall. "Just work stuff," he lied. "Some deadlines?" She nodded and let the subject drop. Mark exhaled. For one brief moment, he believed he might still salvage things if Carla would stay away, if the police never returned, if he could bury this chapter of his life forever. But secrets have a way of resurfacing in the most brutal fashion, and that reckoning was closer than Mark realized. Late that night, while Sarah slept fitfully, her pregnancy making it hard to find a comfortable position, Mark lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The events of the last 24 hours churned in his mind. He reached for his phone on the nightstand, desperately checking if Carla had finally texted him. Nothing. His anxiety climbed. In the dim glow of his bedside lamp, Mark scrolled through social media. He searched Carla's name, rummaging through any clues that might explain her sudden panic. He found her profile inactive, last updated weeks ago. As he scrolled further, he stumbled upon a post from a friend of Carla's referencing a certain mess Carla was in. There were no details, just cryptic comments and concerned replies. Unease prickled through him. He decided to do what he should have done from the beginning, look up Carla Rodriguez in public records. Accessing an online search, he discovered a few results indicating minor legal issues in her past. A DUI charge from years ago, a civil dispute over unpaid rent. Nothing that jumped out as immediately dangerous. Yet Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something heavier was in play. He slept fitfully, waking at dawn to Sarah's gentle stirring. She pressed a hand to her belly and turned to him, blinking in the early morning light. For a moment, they smiled at each other, a brief slice of normalcy. Mark tried to cling to that moment, to pretend they were still the couple who had once laughed on the campus lake. But the outside world wouldn't allow it. As Sarah headed to the shower, Mark's phone buzzed an unknown number. He swallowed hard and answered. "Mark." A voice whispered urgently. "Carla." "Thank God. Where have you been?" Mark scurried out of bed and closed the bedroom door behind him. "I can't talk long," Carla said, her voice hoarse. "I'm in trouble, Mark. I owe money to some people. Dangerous people. The police showed up because they were tipped off about something. It's not about us. Not exactly. But if they connect any dots..." Her voice trailed off. Mark felt his stomach churn. "Carla, what exactly did you do?" A pause. "It's complicated. I made some bad decisions. Now I need a place to stay, just for a few nights. My landlord kicked me out. I have nowhere else to go." Mark braced himself against the wall. No, Carla. You can't come here." "My wife, I have no one else to ask." She pleaded, her tone verging on desperation. "Please, I'll be discreet. I'll stay out of sight. I promise." He closed his eyes, the guilt mixing with dread. Sarah was in her final months of pregnancy, and the last thing he wanted was to endanger her or cause more stress. But Carla's frantic plea tugged at him. In some twisted sense, he felt responsible for her predicament, as if his affair had pushed her to the brink. "Let me think," he muttered finally. "I'll call you back." He ended the call and slumped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. The drama spiraled further out of control, and with each passing moment, Mark dug himself deeper into a pit of moral compromise. That morning, Sarah left for a routine prenatal checkup. She invited Mark to come along, but he claimed he had an important virtual meeting for work. Guilt gnawed at him as he watched her drive away alone, all while he contemplated how to handle his mistress's precarious situation. He called Carla back and arranged to meet her at a nearby diner, a rundown place that rarely attracted attention. When he arrived, he found her in a corner booth wearing a hoodie, sunglasses perched on her head, her face drawn and tired. She looked up at him with a mixture of relief and shame. "Thank you for meeting me," she murmured. Mark slid into the booth, grimacing at the sticky tabletop. "Tell me what's going on." Carla recounted her story in fragments. She owed a large sum to a local loan shark connected to her ex, and they'd threatened her. She had tried to pay them back, but fell behind. The previous night, she'd gotten a tip that the police had been contacted, perhaps to bring her in for questioning. She believed the noise complaint was a ruse, an attempt to locate her. Mark's head spun. This was more than a simple affair gone awry. Carla was ensnared in a criminal web, and he was now on the periphery of it. "You can't stay at my house," he repeated firmly. "It's too risky. Sarah would kill me." Carla's eyes glistened. "I know I don't deserve your help, but I'm desperate. Just a few nights. I can keep a low profile. If anyone asks, say I'm a friend from work, going through a breakup." Mark thought of Sarah's growing suspicion, the near miss with the police, the unborn child who needed a stable home. Every logical fiber in his being screamed at him to cut Carla off. Yet he felt a twisted sense of responsibility. He'd let Carla into his life. He'd ignored every red flag. Now she was pleading for help, and part of him couldn't bear to leave her in danger. Against all better judgment, he agreed to house her in the guest room for a single night. Carla's eyes brightened with gratitude. Mark cursed himself silently, knowing he was only tightening the noose around his neck. That evening, Mark lied to Sarah again. He said a colleague was in town for business and needed a place to crash for the night. Sarah, although surprised, did not protest. She was preoccupied with back pains and a baby that kicked relentlessly. Besides, Mark had rarely brought colleagues home, so she assumed it was a genuine favor. Carla arrived late, wearing a cap and oversized clothes to avoid recognition. Mark ushered her into the guest room, quickly praying the neighbors wouldn't notice. Sarah was in bed reading a pregnancy book. Mark told her he'd be up soon, then crept to the guest room where Carla lingered by the door. "You have to stay in here," he hissed. "Do not step out unless it's absolutely necessary. Sarah can't see you. She'll recognize you from the police visit." Carla nodded, her eyes downcast. "I understand." "Thank you, Mark." He closed the door and returned to the master bedroom. Nerves frayed. Sarah was yawning, complaining of back pain. Mark sat beside her, gently massaging her lower spine in an attempt to soothe her. The moment felt painfully ironic. Here he was tending to his pregnant wife while his mistress hid in the next room. Every stroke of his hand reminded him how far he'd fallen. That night, Sarah drifted off after some time, but Mark couldn't sleep. He heard every squeak of the floorboards, every rustle of movement from Carla's room. Around midnight, a text arrived on his phone. "I'm so sorry for all this. Carla." He stared at the message, feeling a twinge of pity. After a moment's thought, he tapped out a response. "Just stay put. We'll sort this out tomorrow." Morning dawned bright and tense. Sarah rose early to prepare for a follow-up doctor's appointment. Mark feigned a headache, offering to stay behind just in case his colleague needed help. Sarah seemed unconvinced, suspicion flickering in her gaze, but she gathered her belongings and left anyway. With Sarah gone, Mark hurried to Carla's room, only to find her asleep in a rumpled bed, eyes puffy from crying. He woke her gently, offering coffee. She told him she'd be out of his hair by afternoon, having made some arrangements to lay low at a friend's house. Mark felt relief wash over him. If Carla left for good, he might salvage some semblance of normalcy. But just as Carla was preparing to slip out, a frantic knocking rattled the front door. Mark's heart lodged in his throat. Not again. He peeked out a window. Officer Morales stood on the porch, hand poised to knock again. Turning, he found Carla in the hallway. Terror etched across her face. "Go to the kitchen," he commanded under his breath. "Hide." As Carla disappeared, Mark inhaled sharply and opened the door, forcing a calm smile. "Officer Morales, what brings you here?" She looked at him with a stony expression, stepping forward, prompting him to let her inside. "I need to ask you a few more questions about Carla Rodriguez." Mark's blood ran cold. "Carla, I told you we worked together, and she stayed over because of the storm." Officer Morales nodded slowly. "We have information suggesting Ms. Rodriguez may be involved in illegal activities. There's a possibility she might contact you again, given your relationship. We'd like your cooperation." Swallowing hard, Mark feigned ignorance. "Look, I don't know what Carla's done. I've barely spoken to her since the other day. She hasn't contacted me." The officer gave a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If you hear from her, You'll let us know immediately, right? Of course, Mark said, managing a nod. Officer Morales seemed unconvinced, but left her card again, instructing him to call if Carla showed up. As she walked out, she let her gaze linger in the foyer, as though sensing someone else's presence. Mark held his breath until she finally exited. Heart racing, he rushed back to the kitchen where Carla was crouched behind the island, eyes wide. "She's on to us," he muttered. "You need to go, right now." Carla stood, her face grim. She slung her bag over her shoulder. "I'll call a taxi." Neither said a word as they hurried to the back door. Carla paused momentarily, turning to Mark with tears brimming. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for all of this. I never wanted to hurt you." Mark nodded, unable to find words. Then, without further ceremony, Carla rushed out the back, disappearing into the alley. Mark closed the door, exhaling a shaky breath. He could almost taste freedom, an escape from the swirling nightmare if he could manage to keep the police at bay and Sarah unaware. But his relief was premature. For even as Carla vanished from sight, a car pulled into the driveway. Sarah was home early, carrying a bag of groceries. She spotted him at the back door, eyes narrowing with confusion. "Why are you standing there like that?" she asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Who was just here?" Mark's stomach twisted in knots. He searched for an excuse, stumbling over words. Nobody. I was just getting some air." Sarah glanced around suspiciously. "Why are you so jumpy, Mark?" He forced a smile that crumbled under Sarah's penetrating stare. Her gaze flicked to the back alley, the slight disarray of the kitchen, the traces of a second coffee mug on the counter. She wasn't naive. She knew him too well. And in that charged silence, Mark felt the final threads of his deceit unraveling. The confrontation Mark had dreaded finally erupted. Sarah demanded answers. Who was staying in the guest room? Why did she find a woman's hairbrush in the bathroom? Why was the police officer here? Each question hammered Mark's fragile composure. At first, he attempted to spin more lies, but Sarah's teary gaze and trembling voice shattered his defenses. Something in him finally broke. He confessed haltingly at first, then in a rush of words he couldn't control. He admitted to the affair, Carla's overnight stays, the police involvement. The only part he censored was Carla's criminal entanglements. He simply told Sarah that Carla was in trouble and the police had come around to question them. Sarah, stunned into silence, gripped the countertop as if to steady herself. Her face went pale and her lips parted in disbelief. She said nothing for a long moment, then asked the question that terrified him. "Did you let her sleep? In our bed? In the bed where I've been sleeping while carrying your child?" Mark wanted to lie, but the weight of his sins was too great. He nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The noise that escaped Sarah's throat sounded like a wounded animal, a strangled cry of agony. She turned away, pressing a hand to her swollen belly as tears streamed down her cheeks. "You brought her into our home, into my bed. What kind of monster are you?" She spat, voice thick with revulsion. He reached out, but she recoiled. "Sarah, I'm sorry," he whispered, but he couldn't find words to justify the unforgivable. Without warning, Sarah's emotions surged, and she slammed her hand against the cupboard. The baby inside her kicked violently, as though sensing her turmoil. Trembling. Sarah stumbled to the living room, sinking onto the couch. Mark followed, guilt etched on his face, but she held up a hand. "Stay away," she said, her voice choked. "I need to think. I need to understand how I married someone who could do this to me." He stood there, helpless, wanting nothing more than to console her to undo every wrong decision. But the damage was done. There was no comfort he could offer that would mend the gaping wound in her chest. It was in the midst of this tense standoff that another knock came at the door, 3 hard, distinct raps that echoed through the silent house. Mark closed his eyes, dreading what might come next. Sarah sat upright, alarmed, her tear-streaked face turning toward the tumult entrance. When Mark opened the door, Officer Morales and Officer Thompson stood there again, expressions grave. This time they weren't alone. A plain-clothes detective accompanied them, a badge clipped to his belt. Mark's heart dropped. "Mr. Anderson," the detective said, voice clipped. "May we come in?" Mark stepped aside, mind spinning. Sarah, rising from the couch, locked eyes with him, fear and betrayal mingling on her face. The detective introduced himself as Detective James Carter. "We've been investigating certain criminal activities involving Carla Rodriguez," Carter stated, flipping open a small notebook. "We have reason to believe she's been using associates, willing or otherwise, to conceal her whereabouts and possibly launder money. We have reason to believe you might have information." Mark's hands shook. I only knew she was in some sort of trouble. She said she owed money. That's all." Detective Carter nodded. "She's wanted for questioning related to fraud and conspiracy. We believe she's been leveraging personal relationships to hide assets. Are you aware of any large sums of money being transferred through your accounts, Mr. Anderson?" The question hit Mark like a blow to the gut. Instantly, he recalled the times he'd covered Carla's expenses, the secret transfers. At the time, he thought it was just gifts or petty cash. Had she used him for something bigger? No. Mark lied weakly, his voice faltering. "I mean, I gave her money for personal emergencies, but not large sums." The detective studied Mark's face. "Ms. Rodriguez was reported at this address yesterday. We have statements from a neighbor that a woman matching her description entered your home late at night. Is that correct?" Sarah's eyes turned accusatory. She glared at Mark, arms folded protectively over her belly. Mark caught between fear of legal repercussions and shame before his wife nodded slowly. She was here, but she left. Detective Carter flicked through his notes, then addressed Sarah directly. "Mrs. Anderson, were you aware that Ms. Rodriguez spent time in your home?" Sarah's expression tightened, tears brimming again. "I only just found out." She managed her voice laced with bitterness. Carter frowned, turning back to Mark. "We'll be checking your financial records. If we find any evidence that you assisted Ms. Rodriguez in illegal activities, you'll be charged as an accomplice." Terror seized Mark. This was far worse than a mere affair exposed. He could face criminal charges. In a panic, he exclaimed, "I had no idea. She told me she was in trouble, but I didn't know about any illegal schemes. I was just trying to help." The detective let silence reign for a moment, before nodding to Officer Morales and Officer Thompson. "Let's go," he said, handing Mark his card. "If Ms. Rodriguez contacts you, call immediately, or there will be consequences." As they left, Sarah sank back onto the couch, trembling. Mark stood in the foyer, the detective's card clutched in his shaking hand. The reality of his actions closed in on him like a suffocating fog. He had betrayed his wife, endangered their child, and now potentially implicated himself in a criminal case. His once perfect life was in ruins, and he had only himself to blame. After the police left, silence descended in the living room. Sarah turned to Mark, tears shimmering in her eyes. He tried to approach, to place a reassuring hand on her shoulder, but she jerked away. "I can't do this, Mark," she said. Voice hollow. "You lied to me. You let her into our home. You risked our baby's safety." He felt the sting of her words, but any defense he tried to muster sounded weak. He could only say, "I'm sorry," so many times before it meant nothing. Sarah cradled her belly. "I need space. I need to think about how we're going to move forward, if we even can." He wanted to beg for forgiveness, to promise he'd rectify everything. But how could he? The scars were too deep. Sarah rose shakily, gathering her purse and keys. "Where are you going?" Mark asked, panic welling up in him. To Jessica's, Sarah replied, "I need someone I can trust right now." Mark nodded, knowing he had no right to stop her. He watched as she left the door, clicking softly behind her, a symbol of the distance that had grown between them. Alone in the quiet house, Mark felt a wave of despair crash over him. Everything was unraveling, and he wasn't sure there was enough thread left to stitch his life back together. Days passed. Sarah remained with Jessica, avoiding Mark's calls, except for brief updates about her pregnancy. She needed to check in with her doctor regularly, and Mark was sick with worry about her stress levels. He texted her. Apologies poured out his remorse in long messages, but rarely received more than a one-word reply. Meanwhile, the police made good on their promise to investigate Mark's finances. They subpoenaed his bank statements and credit card records. He had to retain a lawyer, a tired, middle-aged man named Leonard Price, who took Mark's frantic calls at all hours. Price assured Mark that unless they found direct evidence of large-scale fraud, he'd likely avoid severe charges. But the possibility of an arrest loomed, overshadowing every waking moment. Carla, for her part, vanished entirely. Mark heard nothing from her, no texts, no calls. He told the police he hadn't seen her, which was the truth. She had disappeared without a trace. Detective Carter stopped by once more, questioning Mark about specific transactions. Mark tried to explain they were gifts or petty loans, but Carter remained skeptical. Jessica occasionally messaged Mark in Sarah's stead, telling him to stay away until further notice. She informed him that Sarah was safe, but deeply distressed, her blood pressure rising dangerously due to the emotional turmoil. Hearing that Mark felt crippling guilt. He had pledged to love and protect Sarah, and yet he was the one jeopardizing her health and possibly their child's. A week later, the phone rang. Mark answered automatically, half hoping it was Sarah. Instead, Carla's voice crackled on the other end. "Mark, I'm so sorry," she said, sounding frazzled. "I heard the police are looking for me. I can't run forever. I've decided to turn myself in." He sank into a chair, relief and dread warring within him. "That's probably the best thing," he said. "They think I helped you launder money or something. You have to clear this up." She sighed. "I will. Look, I used your accounts to park some funds temporarily. I never meant to drag you down. I just needed a place to hide it. My ex threatened me if I didn't get him the money." Mark's jaw clenched. "Carla, you had no right." "I know," she interrupted. "I've made a mess. I'm going to explain everything to the police, tell them you weren't involved. You deserve that much." Anger flared in Mark, but he also recognized this might be his lifeline, the only way to avoid charges. "Just make sure you do the right thing." Her voice trembled. "I will. I truly did care for you, Mark, in my own selfish way." Before he could respond, she hung up, leaving Mark in stunned silence. He called his lawyer immediately, who advised him to wait for Carla's statement and remain cooperative. That night, Mark received another call, this time from Detective Carter. Carla had turned herself in, and she had indeed explained that Mark was clueless about the fraudulent aspect of her finances. The detective's tone was neutral, but Mark sensed a hint of relief. "You're free from suspicion for now, Mr. Anderson," Carter said. "But we'll verify her statement. If there's any discrepancy, we'll be in touch." When Mark ended the call, he exhaled a long breath of relief. The nightmare might finally be nearing an end, at least on the criminal side. But the personal damage remained gaping and raw. With Carla's arrest and her confession clearing Mark of wrongdoing, the legal nightmare finally eased. Now all Mark could focus on was repairing what truly mattered: his marriage. He reached out to Sarah repeatedly through messages and letters, begging for a chance to talk. After encouragement from Jessica, Sarah agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe. Mark arrived early, nervous and remorseful. When Sarah walked in, she looked tired but strong. They sat in silence for a moment before Mark spoke. "I know I can't undo what I did," he said, voice trembling. "But please let me prove I've changed." Sarah's eyes welled with tears. "You risked everything for what you let her into our home, into our bed." Mark reached for her hand, but she pulled back slightly. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said. "Just the chance to be a good father, to be better." "I need time," Sarah whispered. "I have to think about what's best for the baby." Mark nodded. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. There was still pain between them, but there was also a door left ajar, just wide enough for the possibility of redemption. Mark moved into a small apartment, giving Sarah space while she stayed home preparing for the baby. He began therapy and parenting classes, determined to change. Jessica helped coordinate visits, and Sarah let Mark attend doctor appointments. At the ultrasound, they saw their daughter's face. Mark cried, overwhelmed. Sarah remained distant, but acknowledged his efforts. She appreciated his support, even if trust hadn't returned. Hints from Jessica suggested Sarah hadn't given up entirely. Still, the wounds ran deep. For now, they focused on the baby, unsure of what the future held, but both still holding on just a little. When Sarah went into early labor, she called Mark in panic. He rushed her to the hospital and never left her side. For 3 tense days he stayed by her bed, helping however he could. As Sarah rested, Mark silently vowed to earn back her trust. One night, she stirred and whispered, "I hate what you did, but I see you're trying." Mark held her hand gently. "I'll do whatever it takes." Her eyes softened. "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was hope. And for Mark, that was everything. Back home, on bed rest, Sarah allowed Mark to help during the day, though he returned to his studio apartment at night. Their conversations grew more civil, focused on Emily's future. One afternoon, Sarah suggested counseling, not to save the marriage yet, but to learn how to co-parent. Mark agreed eagerly. Sessions with Dr. Christine Lee were raw and painful. Sarah voiced her heartbreak. Mark confronted his fears and guilt. It wasn't healing overnight, but it was a beginning. Each meeting chipped away at their distance, offering a small, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, something could be rebuilt. At 9 months pregnant, Sarah went into labor. Mark was at her side through every contraction, with Jessica offering support. After hours of pain and anticipation, their daughter arrived, a healthy girl with a strong cry and a head full of dark hair. As Mark cradled Emily, Grace Anderson, tears streamed down his face. For a fleeting moment past, betrayals faded beneath the miracle of her birth. Sarah watched silently, eyes full of conflicting emotions. In that fragile peace, they shared an unspoken understanding. Mark devoted himself to fatherhood, staying up through night feedings, changing diapers, and caring for Sarah during recovery. Though still cautious, Sarah allowed him back into the home, but not her heart, not fully. The counselor advised they take things slow and focus on Emily's well-being. Carla's case concluded with her conviction. Mark was officially cleared, but the damage to his marriage endured. It took nearly a year of therapy and honest effort before Sarah was willing to try again. She laid out clear rules, complete transparency, shared accounts, no more secrets. Mark agreed without hesitation. They weren't the same couple as before, but in their brokenness, they found a way forward, anchored by love for their child and a hard-won trust. Roamed hope found its way back. Thank you for joining me on this roller coaster tale of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strenuous journey toward redemption. Life can twist us in unexpected ways, testing bonds and pushing us to the very edge of what we believe is possible. In Mark and Sarah's story, we're reminded that no matter how dark the night becomes, there's always a chance, however slim, for forgiveness, if we're willing to face our own failings and fight to make things right. Perhaps their story resonates with you, or someone you know, urging us all to recognize the fragility of trust and the power of second chances. If you found this story gripping and emotionally stirring, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps bring more dramatic, thought-provoking stories to life. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, stay tuned for more unforgettable tales.